There is a version of the hospital that the daytime staff never sees. The version that exists between 2 and 4 a.m. when the corridors compress into something narrower than their actual dimensions. When the fluorescent lighting takes on a quality that is neither warm nor clinical, but something in between, the specific ambiance of a space that was built to save lives and has absorbed the weight of every life it could hold. The version where the only sounds are the distant beeping of monitors and the soft rhythm of a nurse's shoes on linoleum, and the silence that fills every room that is not currently occupied by the living. A charge nurse on a surgical ward in Ohio answered a call button at 3:17 a.m. that had activated in a room that had been stripped, cleaned, and locked following a patient death 6 hours earlier. She walked the empty corridor to the empty room and pushed open the door and found the call button remote, cord disconnected, sitting on the stripped mattress. A night shift orderly in a Pennsylvania hospital was mopping the 4th floor hallway when every monitor on the floor alarmed simultaneously, not in the staggered sequence of a technical failure, but in precise unison, at the exact same second, for a patient whose room he was standing outside and who had died 2 days prior, and whose room had been reassigned but not yet reoccupied. And the last one, a traveling nurse working her 3rd week at a rural hospital in Kentucky, went to check on a patient in room 7 at 4 a.m. after her colleague reported hearing that patient speaking loudly. She found the patient in a deep sedated sleep, vitals stable, the room completely quiet. She reported this to her colleague. Her colleague told her he had heard the patient clearly through the closed door, saying the same name over and over, a name that belonged to no one on staff, a name that matched, as they discovered the following morning, the name of the previous patient in that room, who had died in that room 11 days prior. 5 hospitals, 5 night shifts, 5 accounts from healthcare workers who spent their careers preparing for every medical eventuality and found themselves entirely unprepared for what waited in the rooms between 2 and 4 a.m. The call button in room 412 activated at 3:17 a.m. and Nurse Denise saw it illuminate on the panel at the nurse's station and noted it the way she noted every activation on a shift that was otherwise running quietly, with a specific kind of attention that the overnight develops, an alertness that is not tension but its close neighbor. She was 51, a charge nurse with 23 years on surgical floors at a regional hospital in central Ohio, a woman whose experience had produced in her the particular equanimity of someone who has seen enough to have developed a graduated response to the full range of what a hospital night can present. She was not easily startled. She was not given to interpretation of ordinary events as extraordinary ones. She was, by every professional measure, exactly the person you want in charge of a surgical floor. At 3 a.m., room 412 had been occupied until 9 p.m. that evening by a 78-year-old patient who had died from complications following a procedure. The family had been present. The death had been attended and documented. The body had been transported, and the room had been cleaned and stripped by housekeeping before 11 p.m. The housekeeping log, she checked it after, confirmed the room was cleaned at 10:47 p.m. The room had been locked by the charge nurse, going off shift at 11:30 p.m. when Denise arrived. Standard procedure for a room awaiting reassignment. She looked at the panel. Room 412 was clearly illuminated. She looked down the corridor. The door to 412 was closed, as she had confirmed it at the beginning of her rounds. She walked to 412. She had her master key. She unlocked the door and opened it and reached for the light switch. The room was stripped and clean. The bed was bare mattress. The monitoring equipment was off. The chair in the corner was empty. The room had the specific quality of a space that has been thoroughly cleaned and that holds, faintly, the antiseptic smell of that cleaning over an older layer of smell that is unavoidable in rooms where human beings have been seriously ill. On the bare mattress, placed near the center, was the call button remote. Not the standard position. Call buttons were clipped to the bed rail or left on the bedside table. This one was on the mattress, and it was not connected to anything. The cord that connected it to the wall panel was not plugged in. The remote was disconnected, placed on the bare mattress of an empty room. A disconnected remote had activated the panel. Pause. She stood in the doorway of 412, and she held the light switch, and she looked at the remote on the mattress, and she applied her 23 years to the situation. The remote could activate without connection in certain system malfunctions. She was aware of this, had seen it once before in a different building with an older call system. The remote had not been placed by her. She had not been in this room. The housekeeping staff who had cleaned it at 10:47 p.m. would need to be asked whether they had left it there. She retrieved the remote. She plugged it back into the wall jack. She wrote a maintenance note. She documented the activation in her incident log. She finished her shift. In the morning, she asked housekeeping whether they had left the call button remote on the mattress after cleaning. The lead housekeeper checked the notes from the previous evening's crew. She said, "We remove everything when we clean a post-death room. All equipment, all personal items. We would not have left a remote on the mattress." Denise asked if the remote could have been there before their cleaning, and they had missed it. The housekeeper said, "We stripped the bed completely and cleaned the mattress. If it had been there, we would have moved it." Denise has worked at that hospital for 11 more years since. She has had the call panel anomaly happen once more. A different room, a different night. And she has logged it both times in her incident records under equipment malfunction. She told me that what she believes, privately, after 23 years of overnight shifts, is this: rooms that have held someone at the end of their life hold something of that time for a while afterward. Not the person. She is careful about this distinction. Something of the moment. The imprint of the last hours, which were hours of significant human experience, pressing against the physical space where they occurred. She does not think the patient in 412 pressed the call button. She thinks something of the pressing remained. She thinks it activated when the room was empty, because the room being empty was when it could. Every monitor on the 4th floor of Mercy General alarmed at exactly 2:43 a.m. simultaneously, in the specific unison that James has spent 4 years attempting to explain and has not been able to explain in terms that satisfy him. He was 28, an overnight orderly in his second year at the hospital, working the 11 to 7 shift on a floor that handled general medical patients. Not ICU, not surgical, but the broad middle category of patients, sick enough to be admitted and stable enough to not require specialized monitoring. He had been mopping the south corridor, approximately 10 feet from the door to room 404, when the alarms began. not staggered, not one after another in the sequence that a power surge or a system error would produce, each monitor activating on its own fractional timing, simultaneously. The alarms of 8 patient rooms lighting the corridor in orange, and the sound of 8 monitors reaching their alert threshold at the identical moment, a sound that James has described as something he felt in his chest before he processed it as sound. He looked at the room he was standing outside. Room 404 was vacant. It had been vacant since 2 days prior, when its patient, a 61-year-old man admitted for cardiac monitoring, had died of a second and unsurvivable cardiac event. The room had been cleaned. The monitoring equipment had been disconnected. Room 404 was an empty room with no active monitors. The nurses reached the corridor within seconds of the alarms. The floor coordinator silenced the alarm panel. Every patient on the floor who was actively monitored showed normal vitals. The alarms had not been triggered by patient conditions. Every monitor was functioning normally. The system showed no record of a coordinated alarm event. James stood in the corridor and watched the coordinator reset the panel, and he looked at room 404's closed door. He said, "Why did all of them go off at the same time?" The coordinator said it was probably a system event, a software update, or a network issue. She said it without looking at him. He asked, "What about 404? It's empty. There's nothing in it to alarm." She looked at him then. She said, 404's equipment is disconnected. He said, "I know. That's why I'm asking." She did not have an answer. She finished the reset and went back to the station. James finished his shift. He went home. He looked up the patient who had been in room 404. He found his obituary in the local paper. The man had been a retired firefighter, well-liked, survived by his wife and 3 adult children. The obituary listed his date of death as 2 days prior. The date 2 days prior was March 14th. The alarm event had occurred on March 16th at 2:43 a.m. He looked at the obituary more carefully. The time of death was listed as 2:43 a.m., March 14th. The monitors had alarmed on the anniversary of the exact minute of the man's death, not the day, the minute. James has told this account to 7 people. 3 of them have offered explanations that he has examined and found insufficient. 2 of them have told him it was a coincidence. 2 of them have been quiet. He does not work at Mercy General anymore, not because of this, but because he took a different position. He thinks about room 404 on March 16th every year. Not with fear, he says, with something that doesn't have a clean name. The feeling of a system that was designed to monitor the living briefly, precisely, honoring what it had lost. He does not know if that is what happened. He thinks about it every March. The voice from room 7 was clear enough that it woke her colleague from the light doze that the 3 a.m. valley produces. And this is the detail that matters most, that a second witness heard it independently through a closed door and reported it before anyone went to check. Carla was 31, a traveling nurse completing a 3-week assignment at a rural hospital in eastern Kentucky, working the overnight shift on a medical surgical floor with 2 other nurses and an aide. She had learned the floor's rhythms quickly, who called frequently, who slept through the night, which rooms produced sounds, and which were reliably quiet. Room 7 was reliably quiet. Its current patient was a post-operative elderly woman recovering from hip surgery, sedated appropriately, sleeping on schedule. she was not a person who called in the night. At 3:50 a.m., the night aide, a woman named Petra, who had been on this floor for 6 years, came to the nurse's station and told Carla she had heard the patient in room 7 speaking loudly, not calling out, speaking as in conversation, repeatedly saying the same word or phrase. Carla went to room 7. The patient was asleep, sedated, resting, vitals on the monitor exactly as they should be. The room was completely quiet. Carla returned to the station and told Petra the patient was asleep and silent. Petra said, "I heard her clearly. Through the door, she kept saying a name." Carla asked which name. Petra said a name that Carla did not recognize as belonging to anyone on staff or in the current patient's census. Carla wrote the name in her notes because she was thorough and because something about Petra's certainty made her thorough. She completed the rest of her shift. In the morning, she did what she did every morning at the end of her first week on a new floor. She reviewed the unit's recent records to orient herself to the patient history. Room 7 had been occupied in the previous month by one other patient before the current one, a man who had died in room 7 11 days prior. His first name was the name Petra had heard the sleeping patient repeatedly speaking through the closed door at 3:50 a.m. Carla showed Petra the records. Petra read the name. She went very quiet. She said, that's what she was saying. They did not discuss it with the day staff. Carla documented it in her personal notes, not in the patient's chart, where it had no clinical place. She finished her 3-week assignment and moved to her next placement. She has been traveling nursing for 4 years. She has worked in 31 hospitals. She told me that the specific variety of encounter she experienced in room 7 is not unusual in her experience, not the specific content, the specific category. Patients in post-operative states, in states of altered consciousness, in the specific pharmaceutical twilight of managed sedation, sometimes produce things, speak things, name things. She has developed a theory, which she holds carefully because she is a clinical person, and careful theories are the only kind worth holding. The altered states that medications produce may thin the membrane that separates ordinary sensory processing from whatever it is that ordinary sensory processing filters out. Patients in those states sometimes perceive what other people cannot. Sometimes they speak what they perceive. Room 7's patient was saying a name that she should not have known. She was saying it the way you say the name of someone you are speaking to. The patient in bed 2 of room 318 had been dead for 40 minutes when his cardiac monitor produced a reading that the attending cardiologist has described in the years since as the most technically anomalous thing he has encountered in 28 years of cardiology. Dr. Werner was not on the floor when it happened. He was in the building. He was always in the building during overnight on-call rotations, available but not present on the floor unless called. The call came at 4:22 a.m. The patient, a 67-year-old man who had been admitted for an arrhythmia evaluation, had died at 3:40 a.m. of a sudden and unexpected cardiac event. He had been pronounced, the family had been called, the documentation had been completed, the monitor had been silenced but not disconnected. Standard practice in a room awaiting housekeeping, where disconnecting the monitoring equipment was part of the cleaning process. At 4:22 a.m., the monitor in room 318, monitoring a patient who had been dead for 42 minutes, produced a reading, not a flat line, not the straight line of no cardiac activity, a reading, a waveform, the specific graphic representation of cardiac electrical activity that a monitor produces when a heart is beating. The nurse who saw it on the hall monitor panel called Dr. Werner. She described what she was seeing. He was on the floor in 4 minutes. He looked at the monitor. He looked at the patient in the bed. He confirmed what he could confirm. The patient was deceased, had been pronounced 46 minutes prior, was not producing any cardiac activity. He examined the monitor leads, still attached to the patient, as they had been since admission. He examined the monitor itself. He looked at the waveform displayed. He said to the nurse standing beside him, "This is a normal sinus rhythm. Normal sinus rhythm is the cardiac pattern of a resting, healthy, functioning human heart. The waveform displayed on the monitor of a dead man was a normal sinus rhythm. It lasted for 11 minutes. Dr. Werner stood in room 318 for 11 minutes and watched a dead man's monitor produce the cardiac reading of a living person. And at the end of 11 minutes, the monitor returned to the flat line of no activity. And then the reading was gone. He has written about this in his private notes, which he shared with me. He has not published it. He cites the obvious professional concerns, the career implications of a cardiologist who has submitted a formal account of a deceased patient's monitor producing a normal sinus rhythm for 11 minutes. He is aware of every technical explanation. He has applied them all. The leads were checked for interference. The monitor was checked for malfunction. The specific waveform produced, he is precise about this in his notes, was not consistent with any known electrical interference pattern. Electrical interference produces noise, artifact, irregular signals. What the monitor showed was a clean, regular, textbook, normal sinus rhythm. A clean, regular, textbook, normal sinus rhythm for 11 minutes. In a man who had been dead for 42 minutes when it started and 53 minutes when it ended. He told me, "I don't have a clinical explanation. I have 28 years of cardiology. I know what interference looks like. I know what artifact looks like." That was neither. He paused. "I have one explanation. I don't know how to write it in a chart." He did not tell me the explanation. He did not need to. The last account belongs to a nurse named Patricia, and it is the one I want to give the most space to, because what it describes is not a single anomalous event, but a pattern. A pattern she documented across 6 weeks on the same floor at the same hospital. A pattern that, when she finally laid all the documentation side by side, pointed towards something that she has spent 3 years trying to name. Patricia was 44, a night shift charge nurse at a community hospital in rural Virginia, working the overnight on a general medical floor she had been on for 9 years. She knew the floor with the deep familiarity of long tenure, knew its sounds, its rhythms, its specific personality at different hours of the night. She was not a person who noticed things that weren't there. In September, she began noticing something that was there. It started with the call buttons. Room 6 had been a high-activity room for the past year, an older floor where the patients tended toward the elderly and the seriously ill, and Room 6 had seen 3 deaths in 12 months. On a Tuesday night in September, the Room 6 call button activated at 2:58 a.m. The room was vacant. Its most recent patient had died 5 days prior, and it had not yet been reassigned. She checked the room. Empty, clean, call button, remote. in its standard position on the bed rail where housekeeping left it. She logged it as an equipment anomaly. Maintenance was requested. 2 weeks later, in October, room 6 activated again at 2:58 a.m. The room was still vacant. The reassignment had been pending a minor maintenance repair. Same time, same room, 2 weeks apart. She checked the remote, plugged in, functional, in its standard position. She called maintenance again. She documented it. In November, room 6 was occupied by a new patient. The call button activation at 2:58 a.m. did not recur for the first 3 weeks. Then, on a Monday night in late November at 2:58 a.m., the room 6 button activated. She responded. The patient, a 72-year-old woman, was asleep, had not pressed the button. The remote was on the bed rail, untouched. She looked at the patient. She looked at the button. She looked at the time on her watch. 2:58 a.m. She went back to the nurse's station. She pulled her incident log. She found the previous 2 activations. She looked at the timestamps. 2:58 a.m. 2:58 a.m. 2:58 a.m. 3 activations of room 6's call button across 6 weeks at the same minute. She went into the hospital's record system, the system that maintained patient history for the floor. She pulled up room 6's occupancy history. She looked at the 3 deaths that had occurred in that room in the past 12 months. She looked at the documented times of death. 1 patient had died at 2:58 a.m. She held her breath and looked at the other 2. 2:58 a.m. 2:58 a.m. All 3 patients who had died in room 6 in the past 12 months had died at 2:58 a.m. Patricia has told me that the moment she understood what she was looking at, she sat for a long time at the nurse's station without moving. She is a practical person, a person whose professional life is built around evidence and protocol, and the careful management of complex clinical situations. She applied everything she had to what she was seeing. She applied it for a long time. The activations at 2:58 a.m. had begun after the first death in room 6. The activations had continued across vacant and occupied states of the room at the identical time, in correspondence with the time at which 3 people had died in that room. She has one interpretation she is willing to share. She does not present it as certainty. She presents it as the interpretation that, having applied every other framework she possesses, she cannot rule out. She thinks the room remembers 2:58 a.m. She thinks a room that has held 3 deaths at the same moment in time develops a relationship with that moment, a structural memory, an echo, a recording that replays, not in sound, but in the one mechanism the room has available. The mechanism designed for calling for help. The mechanism the dying use. The mechanism that activates at the only time the room knows by heart. The call button in room 6 activates at 2:58 a.m. It has been activating at 2:58 a.m. for 4 years, since Patricia first documented it. She has submitted 3 maintenance requests. She has filed 2 formal incident reports. Maintenance finds no fault. At 2:58 a.m., room 6 calls. It is calling from somewhere the maintenance team cannot service. It is calling from the specific moment that it has never been able to put down. Patricia answers it every time. She told me that not answering feels wrong, that whatever the call is, wherever it is coming from, whatever it contains, it came from people who used that button when it mattered most, when it was the only thing left to do. She answers it. She says, "I hear you. I'm here. The light stops blinking. 5 hospitals, 5 night shifts, 5 accounts from people who chose a profession built around the care of human lives and found themselves in the 2 and 3 a.m. hours of their shifts in the presence of something that the profession's framework does not fully account for. A call button that activated in a room that had been locked for 6 hours, from a remote that was disconnected, 8 monitors alarming in unison at the exact minute, 2 years to the day, of a patient's death, a sedated patient speaking a dead man's name, a cardiologist watching a deceased patient's monitor produce a normal sinus rhythm for 11 minutes, and a nurse who documents the same room calling at the same minute across 4 years. At the time of the deaths, it remembers. What these 5 accounts describe is not chaos or malfunction or the random statistical noise of complex systems. They describe, across 5 different hospitals and 5 different states, the same thing. A building that holds what it has held, that carries, in its electrical systems and its corridors and the specific air of its empty rooms, the weight of the moments that have occurred within it. Hospitals are built to save lives, but they are also, unavoidably, the buildings where lives end. Thousands of them, across years and decades of continuous operation. And the question these 5 accounts collectively ask is whether that accumulation leaves something behind, whether the machines and the call systems and the monitors designed to respond to the living sometimes respond to something else. The call button came from an empty room. The empty room had been occupied. The question is not whether anyone was there. The question is whether empty is the right word. If this unsettled you, you're not alone.